Good evening, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Happy Douglass Week. We'll just wait one more minute until everyone has taken their virtual seats. Happy Douglass Week. Happy birthday, Frederick Douglass. Happy Valentine's Day. Thank you for tuning in on this very special day. Happy Douglass Week. We'll just wait one more minute until everyone has come in and set up. We'll just give it one more minute. Happy Douglass Week. Final day of Douglass Week. Hard to believe. So we'll just wait another minute. I see lots of people coming in. Thank you for being with us today on this Sunday morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you tune in from today. Thanks for joining us. All right. Happy Douglass Week, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. I am here with my lovely co-hosts and co-organizers of Douglass Week, Sarah McCready and Kristen Leary. My name is Dr. Caroline Schroeder. I'm one of the co-organizers of Douglass Week 2021. It's a pleasure to be with this excellent panel today. I'm so delighted, and happy birthday, Frederick Douglass. Happy Valentine's Day to you all. We're so delighted to celebrate all of these with you, as well as Black History Month in the US. So thank you for joining us. This whole week has been incredible. There's hardly any words to capture how grateful and how inspired we are. And there's so much work to do, but we're so glad and so motivated by you all. And thank you for your generosity, your time, and your creativity. So thank you for all of these amazing events. And I'm so delighted because I think this one is going to be another one of those. And as a scholar of visual arts and film literature, I'm very, very excited about this one. But before we start, just a very brief note about housekeeping. This event will last about 1 hour. We're live on YouTube. So hello, everyone on YouTube. If you want to submit questions, you can pop them into the Q&A box. You'll see them sort of on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can put your questions in there whenever you are ready. Be curious, ask away. Our team is monitoring the Q&A box. We'll pass them on to the speakers, so feel free to ask. We also are recording this session, so it will be live on YouTube. We'll also have a recording, and you'll be able to find that recording on our YouTube channel and our website after Douglass Week. And now it is my great pleasure to hand over to our wonderful host this afternoon, evening, a good friend and colleague, Dr. Michael Waldron, and he'll guide us through this conversation. Michael is an art historian and a curator who specializes in Irish paintings and sculpture and historic collections. He's an assistant curator of collections and special projects at the Crawford, really beautiful Crawford Art Gallery in Cork City. Michael received his PhD from University College Cork in 2016. That's how I know Michael. He also taught literature and art history there, and he has published widely about his research and worked on several interdisciplinary projects like the Deep Maps, West Cork, Coastal Cultures. And Michael, as always, it's a pleasure, and I hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Caroline. Can everyone hear me? I think, okay, I have a nod. So it's a really great pleasure to be, I suppose, chairing this panel, which isn't about me at all. So that's a lucky for everyone. But thank you, Caroline and Kristen and everyone for organizing this wonderful week and for, I suppose, placing this particular session within the schedule, and also, I suppose, to mark Frederick Douglass's birthday. We're very, very lucky to have that. So I suppose this panel itself is designed to be a conversation about the process of portraying iconic figures. And of course, Frederick Douglass is our starting point, but he may not be our end point. And so hopefully we will kind of explore this territory of who gets to be remembered, who gets to be seen, and who is doing the seeing. So this will be part of I suppose, the conversation with our wonderful panel of speakers who I'll introduce just in a minute. But I suppose if we keep in the back of our heads just a few ideas which are really, really current, not least the Black Lives Matter movement and our questioning of I suppose the tradition of portraiture, particularly in sculpture that we've noted over the last year or so, but also the thoughts of the President of Ireland, Michael G. Higgins, recently around the idea of ethical remembrance, and I suppose that open forum for discussion around how we have remembered and how we portray. And then, of course, there is a debate ongoing in the UK around this: who gets to set the narrative around history and education? So without further ado, we'll get into the meat of it, which is to introduce the speakers. And I'll introduce them each separately, and then I'll invite them after that to each speak for about 5 minutes, and we'll get into the questions. So first up, we have Nikkolas Smith, a native of Houston, Texas. Nikkolas is an artivist, concept artist, children's book author, and film illustrator based in Los Angeles, California. His movie poster designs include Black Panther, Beale Street, and Dear White People. And his picture book, The Golden Girls of Rio, was nominated for an NAACP Image Award. He is a proud 2016 White House Innovators of Color Fellow, and his most famous and recognized works focus on artivism. As an illustrator of color, Nikkolas creates captivating art that can spark important conversations around social justice in today's world and inspire meaningful change. Next, we have Jim Fitzpatrick, the Dublin-born visual artist, I suppose best known for his stylized Celtic-inspired works and that lovely stained glass window in Bewley's Cafe in Dublin. Aside from the Book of Conquests, his illustrated retelling of Irish myths, he also produced album artwork for Thin Lizzy and Sinead O'Connor. His by now iconic graphic portrait of Che Guevara, however, stemmed from an unexpected meeting with the Argentine revolutionary in Kilkee, County Clare, while Guevara traced his Irish ancestry. And we might get into that a little bit later. Our third speaker is Kevin O'Brien, who is passionate about telling stories through various forms. Equipped with a master's degree in the history of the Irish Revolutionary period from University College Cork, he has long had an interest in drawing, painting, and I suppose general mark-making activities. He is a co-founder of a street art and guerrilla gardening group, Mad About Cork, and in recent years has worked collaboratively on vibrant and fun street art pieces in Cork and beyond. He also facilitates art workshops for children and takes part in classroom visits. And our last, but by no means least speaker is Erica Mock. Following an 18-year career in sales with major corporations, Erica has more recently dedicated her focus as an expert in integrated security systems spanning from healthcare to government. She studied African and African American studies at Ohio State University, and now living in Rochester, New York. Erica serves as the co-chair of the Racial Equity Initiative for Rochester City School District. Erica continues the work and advocacy of Frederick and Anna Murray Douglass, with a concentration of building stronger children and combating systems of exploitation and racial inequities. So first of all, I would like to invite Nikkolas Smith to talk about his work and I suppose his connection with Frederick Douglass. Over to you, Nikkolas.
Well, hello. Thank you guys for having me. It is really an honor. I am an artivist. I've been making digital paintings for, I guess I'd say the past 7 or 8 years nonstop every week. And not long ago, I guess I would say, yeah, some years ago, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I met Kenneth Morris, and I'm actually a graduate of Hampton University. And so I had heard so much about, Frederick Douglass visits, and, obviously all of the connections with Kenneth Morris and with Frederick Douglass and also Booker T. Washington. And so I just had to meet him. I met him, and instantly we just started coming up with ideas on, different portraits that I could make for Frederick Douglass. And I've made a lot over the years. I'll show you some. But I would say at the heart of my artistry, it's artivism, which is trying to encourage people to make a positive change through my art. So I'm going to share some art with you really quick that I've made. So all of my art really is I have this Sunday sketch series where I make art every week, and it's really based off of Nina Simone's quote of, "It's an artist's duty to reflect the times, look at what's going on in the world, and try to figure out how we can reflect that." And so I've made a lot of things over the years. Every week I'm looking at what's happening in this wild and crazy world and trying to reflect that. And a lot of it, it has to do with many topics. Some of it is immigration, some of it is mass incarceration. A lot of it is social justice. This is my MLK in a hoodie piece that kind of kicked it all off for me in 2013 and really opened my eyes to the power of artivism, because this ended up going viral and ended up going on CNN to talk about it. And that was the weekend that Black Lives Matter movement began. It was a crazy time. And so I just kept making more and more. And more and more and more, and always looking at what was the big struggle that was going on at the time. What were the oppressed people screaming out about, and how can I show the humanity of those oppressed people? And so, as you may have remembered, last summer was one of the most intense moments during this time. And so I created some pieces of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. And I was just really pleased and shocked to see that, Michelle Obama, all these people, Janet Jackson, all these people started sharing it and using it as, as a form of their voice and protest. And so that was beautiful. And, going fast forwarding to recently, and the more hopeful images that I'm trying to display of the hope that came out of this last election, and most recently last night I was inspired to do a painting of Frederick Douglass. I would say probably my 5th or 6th painting of him, but this was canvas, which acrylic on canvas, which I typically create digital paintings. So the freestyle canvas paint is kind of just a fun therapeutic thing for me to get into, really. And so that was last night. This was years ago for Kenneth Morris, trying to make a postage stamp of Frederick Douglass, making a monument from Mount Rushmore of Frederick. I've gone through all the ideas of how Frederick Douglass can be displayed and commemorated. And this was one of the more recent ones of Frederick Douglass wearing a mask, and really trying to highlight the disparities where a lot of communities in America, they might have a 30% Black population with 80% of the COVID deaths, and just linking the struggles that he fought for and that we're still fighting for today. So that's just a little recap there of my art and what I do. And I'm sure we'll get into more of that later.
Thank you so much, Nikkolas. That's a really very well controlled tour through your work, and we'll come back to some of those ideas. But I'll now invite Jim Fitzpatrick to just to talk a little bit about his work for the next few minutes. And I suppose again how your work might connect with with activism and those figures from our history.
Am I mute or can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, coolaboo. Sorry, go ahead. First question is, and by the way, Nikkolas, your work is amazing. I want to say thank you because I'm aware of it.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
no,
you. I
absolutely.
appreciate that. Likewise.
I follow the whole Black Lives Matter movement assiduously, and God, I worked way back in 1969. I did a painting or drawing of Martin Luther King. Angela Davis, still one of my heroes, still going, still an activist, especially with BDS. Of course, Malcolm X, my hero, you know. So that was 1969, I did all that work. So in 1968, I did the Shea. So I started my activism, I think, about 1967. I was working for a group called the Workers' Party, and they commissioned posters of Irish revolutionaries like Kevin Barry, James Connolly, which they sold under the GPO to raise funds. They'd given up violence and declared themselves a political organization, a bit like the Panthers could have and should have, but they've moved in a different direction. And I was aware of the Panthers at the time and had connections there too. And just to give you a laugh before we get on to Che Guevara of any of that, you may have heard of an Irish band called Thin Lizzy. When you hear the song played before the Super Bowl, "The Boys Are Back in Town," that's Thin Lizzy. That was my Black Irish friend, Philip Linus, who was one of my best friends, died tragically young. Anyway, when Philip Linus and Thin Lizzy released an album called Nightlife, in the background is the city, any city, with a big moon behind it. And in the foreground, right, is a large Black Panther. And that was in 1974. And I'd just been inspired by seeing a film again of Tommy Smith and Bob Carlos with the famous Salute at the Olympics. And when we were walking down to the reception for the record, the launch in EMI in London, in Shaftesbury, the windows were covered with the image. And I said to Phil, "What do you think of the Black Panther?" And Philip said, "The what?" I said, "The Black Panther, you know, the Panthers." And he said, "You mean the Black Panthers?" And I said, "Yeah, who else?" And he said, "Oh shit, don't tell anybody. The BBC will never play the record." I kept stum for about 25 years. There's a big Black Panther on the front of a Lizzie album cover and nobody copped it. Extraordinary. Anyway, I'll shut up. Go ahead, ask me a question. Thank you, Nikkolas.
That's really great. Tim, I wonder, would you like to talk about how you approached Frederick Douglass or Che Guevara or others in your work? You know, what was the motivation, and how do you set about trying to bring them into your own work, your own style?
It's primarily passion. I'll give you a simple example. The most two recent works of that political nature I've done are obviously, I'll give you, nobody's ever seen this one. It's the actual painting that I did from one of my own drawings of Frederick William Douglass. It's all shiny too. It made him a lot darker than he is in anything else. And as you can see, I work endlessly on sketches to get somebody and get their likeness. And I was wonderfully, what's the word for it, helped by Kenneth and the foundation. And especially somebody who knew Kenneth's skin color and his eye color, which was revealing, I would have thought, 200 years later, you know, on his bicentennial, nobody remember things like that. I think I won't get into it. It was one of his descendants, not Ken, who gave me the direction on that. And I kind of wanted to portray that steely look. At the same time, I was working on another project, which I'll show you without getting too political, for the Kurdish people, who, as you know, there's 40 million of them, and they are severely oppressed. And that was their leader, Öcalan, Abdullah Öcalan. So I was working for Abdullah Öcalan, who's in jail for life, by the way, as a terrorist in Turkey, kidnapped by NATO and handed over. And long story cut short, I was conscious when I was doing Öcalan, who's alive, and doing Douglass, who is long past, that they were very similar. They were lone voices for their people for a long, long time. my interest in Douglas was fired by the fact that I knew long before anybody asked me, and I think it was through Jerry Adams and a man called Todd Allen, who's a friend of Kenneth, that I actually was asked to do the portrait because Jerry recommended me. Jerry Adams is the head of Sinn Féin. I don't know if you heard of him. Anyway, he's a very interesting and powerful man, despite the fact that I opposed violence for 35 years. We're now all great friends. Now that we have peace and quiet, well, peace, not quiet. So I was doing Frederick Douglass at a time when I was emotionally involved with the Kurdish people and their fight at the time against what turned out to be ISIS, with American help, thank God. And they're still protected by America from Turkey. So there's conflicts there that I won't get into. But Frederick Douglass, to me, represented something extraordinary. He came to Ireland, a slave who escaped. His owner had, and you can all correct me on this, you know more, his owner tracked him down and wanted him back. So he came to Ireland, and while he was in Ireland and England, the money was raised to buy him from his slave owner. But while he was in Ireland, he couldn't believe the fact that a man of his colour could walk down the main streets of Dublin. And the worst that had happened is that people would pester him to come in and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or have a drink. He did not understand that there was no colour bar of any kind in Ireland. If anything, we're consumed by curiosity, you know? Because we now have a larger Irish Black population and colored people of colour have come here, and now their children are playing with our children and all the rest of it. Because of the Trumpian philosophy that seeped over into Europe, we now have to deal with racism here. And going back 200 years or 150 years when Douglas came here, and seeing the way he was treated then, I wonder, could he walk down the streets of Dublin now without some you-know-what insulting him? And this is what we've all everywhere got to counter now. It's vitally important. I don't want to get very political. We've got rid of Trump. Joe Biden is in there. He seems a decent man to me. Please God, he will be. Kamala Harris may be president. Who knows? Fingers crossed. But that's got to ripple outwards, right across Europe, right across Africa, right across Asia. There's color discrimination in Asia like you wouldn't believe. So not just Europe. So let's work backwards and exalt people like Douglas, who raised the bar, a bit like Copernic would take the knee, just raised the bar and made everybody conscious that a man of his great intellectual abilities could be respected for what he was, not because of the color of his skin. And that happened to him in Ireland. He said very famously that Ireland made me the man I am today. He realized there were people out there who admired him for what he was, irrespective of the color of his skin. And that's why when I was asked, I mean, to me, it's a great honor for, I'm not a redhead now, but a white, freckly redhead.
Sorry, Jim, just a moment.
Sorry.
Jim, I'll interrupt you just there for a little while. I'll introduce the other two speakers, and we'll come back to this conversation because I think it's really, really fascinating to unpick that social and political wave that you're describing. So just hold that thought, if you will. And next, I'd just like to invite Kevin O'Brien to just talk a little bit about his work and I suppose in relation to Frederick Douglass as well and the projects here in Cork. So over to you, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So I suppose for the last few years here in Cork, I've been working on different community projects. So we started out with Mad About Cork, working on, I suppose you might call them little urban regeneration projects. So we make small interventions in spaces around the city that might just be run down. It might be a derelict building. It might just be the side of a footpath that hasn't been put to use. So what we do is we'd fill it with color, with plants, with flowers. We'd use upcycled materials like pallets to make planter boxes. We'd use recycled tins, fill them with soil and plants. And I suppose that eventually led me to kind of take up street art. I never trained as an artist. I never studied art, but I always liked drawing. I always liked a bit of painting and stuff like that. I found it very therapeutic. And eventually, the guerrilla gardening stuff kind of morphed into street art. So what I would have had a bit of a penchant for was doing historical figures, famous Cork people from through the centuries and modern times as well. So we'd have famous sports people, famous actors. We'd have people who've excelled in the field of science, humanitarians, all sorts of different people that Cork can be proud of. And I suppose the aim was to kind of put the city's best foot forward. So I suppose with street art, it's slightly different to public art, where it's not exactly commissioned. You kind of don't have a right to do it, but it's still something that benefits the city, and it can be a very positive thing. So I suppose Frederick Douglass came into it last year for me. Around the time of George Floyd's death, it was kind of compelling to read about it, and you just felt motivated to do something. I felt very motivated to do something, and there was a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I just wanted to show my own support for the Black Lives Matter movement. That was very straightforward. But secondly, here in Cork, I suppose there was a little bit of a pushback against the movement. It was a bit unfortunate to see some of the comments that would be on social media, on radio, on television, but also in the city, there was a couple of street art pieces done to kind of highlight George Floyd's plight, and to show the support, obviously, for Black Lives Matter. So one rather large mural, it was just the text was Black Lives Matter and then direct provision. That was kind of targeted a couple of times, and just with, as I say, just a bit of a pushback against the movement itself. So what I wanted to do was, because some of the criticism was that it wasn't like a Cork issue, it was an American issue. People seem to be washing their hands of it because, well, there is a Black community in Cork. It's probably not as large as it is in America. It definitely isn't, but they'll still tell you experiences of the racism that they experience here in Cork. So what I wanted to do for a street art piece to kind of show my support for the movement was just to see if there was any way of connecting Cork to it. And then I kind of always knew about Frederick Douglass, but I suppose I wasn't as aware of him as I would have liked to have been. But when you read his words, just echo what Jim was saying, when you read Frederick Douglass's words of how he found like just a refuge when he came to Ireland, he found safety, he was treated as a human. It's just something that Irish people should just be so proud of, that this man could come from the conditions he was suffering in America, come here and find that refuge. And for me, that seemed an ideal way just to show this is what Cork can be, this is what Cork should be. And hopefully with the piece that I painted, that it might make people stop and think, like, are we really aware of the racism in Ireland? Are we dealing with it? Are we admitting to it? And I suppose that was the aim of it, essentially, yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Kevin. We might pick up on some of those ideas, those strands as well, but I'll move on very swiftly. I'm being very harsh today. And I'll move swiftly along to our last speaker, Erica Mock. And Erica, I'll just invite you to, I suppose, introduce yourself and your connection with Douglass and the projects you're involved in.
I think there we go. Now it's unmuted. Okay. Yes. So my work, my story with Frederick Douglass began quite some time ago when I was a teenager living in rural Ohio in the United States. And I was really fortunate at two separate times to read both Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery and then the narrative of Frederick Douglass. And the words that resonated with me the most out of that was that teaching him to read would unfit him to be a slave. And to have that understanding and intellect as a small child was quite riveting for me. And I resonated with it growing up in a very racially divided town, and really kind of seeing that it allowed me to understand that I was unfit to be less than, and just a lot of similarities being a biracial child, and what that looked like in America in the 70s and 80s. So there was a whole lot of similarities that allowed me to want to find out more. And so some years advanced, and I was studying at Ohio State in the Black Studies department, doing some research, and I came across FDFI, and I didn't think it was real. So I reached out, and lo and behold, it in fact was. So it's such a long story, but definitely the movements that FDFI stood for, especially when it came to Frederick's most famous quote, that it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Anything involving that, I was down for. So some years again would pass. I've been with the organization for almost 10 years now. And I just this past summer moved to Rochester, New York, where the foundation is now based. And I work very closely with a lot of the children of the community, in particular, as part of a race equity group for one specific K-8 school. Sorry, I promised them I would do a shout out, School 17. So, because some of them may be watching. Yes, but nevertheless, so they really, just talking about artivism, they really inspired me to, you'll see the portrait behind me actually, and I think I can share my screen if we're ready to do that, or we can move on for later. Really quickly, if I did it correctly. We'll see. I'm not as good as Nick. Wait a minute, I might have done it. There we go. So this is just a compilation. We actually put out a contest for the life and portrait of Anna Marie Douglas, because there were only a couple of portraits of her. Well, if it's gonna do it. Okay. Once again, I'm not as good as Nick, so I can see where this is not going. Here we go. Sorry, guys. So there's a couple of portraits, though, that I did want to share with you guys. Successful with this today, apparently. Did we lose me?
I think we still have you, but I think when you share your screen, it slows everything down.
Yeah, I think it did too. I'm going to stop sharing and we'll just move along. So this portrait actually behind me is one from School 17, but then also we did the contest for Anna Marie Douglas. In 2020, authors of the book that picturing Frederick Douglass, they called him the most photographed person of the 19th century, but yet there was only 2 portraits of Anna Marie Douglas. So a lot of the work that we've been concentrating on is to shed light to this person who was the co-conductor of the Underground Railroad as his stop here in Rochester, and really was a huge support system behind him. So a lot of the kids that we've been involved with have really started to delve into all of the activism work that both of the Douglases did here.
Fantastic, thank you, Erica. Okay, so now that everyone now knows what you've been up to and your connection to Douglas, and I think across the board, artivism and really kind of socially engaged practice and initiatives. I wonder, we just have a sort of a comment from a viewer, Stephen Oland, saying that similar kind of resistance to BLM has been seen in Galway, you know, to what Kevin was speaking about, but that, you know, this kind of these histories of opposition, but also, I suppose, the kind of the silence around African history, particularly in the West. You know, the conversation around that. I think what he means is it will be transformative, and that we kind of have to support that. So I think in the work that you guys are doing, and also, you know, the broader scheme of things, you know, the potential for that is really around change and the change of through visibility. I'd like to, I suppose, maybe invite Nikkolas to come back on some of the strands, or any of you actually. I wonder, what do you think about, or what is your thought around making something visible, someone visible, some, you know, people visible? What are the strategies there? Obviously through art competitions in schools, but what are the other strategies that we might kind of promote to achieve visibility, diversity, and so on?
I can start off. I mean, a lot of the work that I do in terms of creating portraits, I think it has to do with allowing people to see the humanity in someone else. I have a piece that I called "This Is Rosa," and you know, that was just based off of, you know, immigration struggles. This is an actual family who was seeking asylum at the border, and they ended up getting, you know, tear gassed and all of that, and just seeking a better life. And you know, a lot of what I want to do is like allow people, even through a portrait, a digital painting, to let someone look at somebody else like right in the eyes. And I feel like that allows people to see the humanity in other people. And so most of my portraits, it's a lot of voices who don't have a voice to speak globally. But as an art piece, you know, it can travel around the world in 2 minutes, and people can look at somebody in the eyes and say, I understand like that struggle of what you're going through. I say that I would do anything for my kids. I understand what that means. And so a lot of it is just, yeah, really trying to, you know, see that humanity in people.
That's a really good point, and I think there's one thing to I suppose through portraiture in some ways, you know, Douglas himself was so photographed and so represented as one individual, which I suppose associated with his celebrity, but so many others don't have that. We don't have that visual record or that same recognition factor, and so it's exceptional individuals that seem to be focused upon, and yet the very, very human stories of, you know, everyday people who haven't been activists, who haven't done this, who haven't done that, but their lives matter. You know, that's kind of a really powerful thing. I wonder, oh, we have another question from the audience. So could the panelists reflect a little on the distinction between commissioned art, or art for a gallery, and street art, especially in terms of effect? So if you place something in a public space, people have no choice but to engage with it. Whereas if it's within a museum context, perhaps there needs to be a gateway to it. So I see Jim has unmuted, so I wonder, Jim, do you have some thoughts?
I've always too many thoughts. I have avoided galleries like the plague. I believe, like Kevin, in street art, all I ever wanted to see was my work everywhere. And when I did the Shea, luckily we hadn't got Twitter and social media because it would have taken over. I decided deliberately to proliferate it. I even published a piece that said I wanted to breed like rabbits. I made it totally copyright free, grandiosely proclaiming that everybody had a right to this image and everybody had a right to use an artist's work, which I've never regretted, by the way. And it's still, if you go on my website, it's free to download in full high res, and you can print it off all you like for all I care. Just don't sell it. So proliferation is the key for street art, for any kind of art, especially when you're committed to something, a cause like Black Lives Matter. I've used my image of Frederick William Douglass for Black Lives Matter and one or two other sort of related causes. Take the Knee. Oh, I did a version of it in red background for just vote, vote, vote for the last election. And I proliferate these on social media. Now, they don't go, you know, as far as I'd like them to go, but even something local. We had a wonderful Black Lives Matter march here. I don't know if you're aware of that, anybody abroad, but it was extraordinary to see so many Black Irish enjoying themselves with loads and loads of decent white people as well, all around the same age group, all 35, 25. And it was magnificent. What's going to happen in Ireland in the future is going to be amazing. I just wish I was around for it. We have such talent in this country coming through. I'm talking about Black talent. And we're talking about singers, we're talking about musicians, we're talking about sports people, sports women. I won't go into names, but they are going to be extraordinary and are getting there already, even as I speak. Now, we did have a problem with racism in Ireland from the time of Trump onwards that we've never had before. I call it white nationalism. And I remember at the time, and I'll just show you something on my phone, being so offended by it that I made this little image, which I hope you can see. It's Philip Lynott, my friend. And I put Black, Irish and proud, no to racism. Because when Philip, God love him, was alive, God rest him, he didn't experience a huge amount of racism because we talked about it. He described growing up Black in Ireland and in Dublin as like having cauliflower ears. Everybody looked at you, but nobody said anything. But Philip was such a charmer. He could charm birds off the trees. And he loved being Black. There's no doubt about it. And it was only later in life he found his Black roots. He started a Black band called Grand Slam. And he was the man who was absolutely proud to be Irish and proud to be Black. And people forget that. And we have national heroes that all these racists claim to admire, like Philip Lynott, like Paul McGrath, the footballer, the wonderful Paul McGrath, a national icon, a national treasure. And they don't realize that when they are embracing this awful racism, that they are disrespecting people like that. They have fought long and hard to be who they are. Philip had to fight hard to be a Black Irishman. Paul McGrath, I'm sure the same. I've only met him once, the most charming man you'd ever meet. One of my heroes as well. I'll have to draw him one day. But this underlying racism that's come into our society only recently, and I call it white nationalism for what it is. Thank God, I hope. I look on Twitter, it's dying down more. People are more aware. Twitter are blocking some of these nutcases. You know what I mean? It'd be wonderful if we could all move forward. I mean, every football match you see, we take the knee. I'd hate to see that stopped. It's a wonderful gesture to say no to racism. Sorry, I'm off on a tangent. You better stop.
No, Jim, you're on fire today. That's, I mean, it's a fantastic way to kind of go from the idea of having your work visible everywhere. And I think Nikkolas and Kevin, you probably have experienced that sort of viral nature of how work can just spread. If we're allowed to talk about viruses positively at the moment. But I suppose we have another few questions here. From Julia, art has a way of existing long after the artist is gone. And it may also maybe we could reflect on street art here as well, the kind of the ephemeral nature of street art or digital art. the question is, I suppose, do you believe your work will have an impact in the future? That sort of legacy, and also, I suppose, to draw Erica in as well, the kind of the legacy of the school's projects as well, and sort of conjuring people from the past, heroes, whoever they may be. Do you have any thoughts on that? I might throw it to Erica and Kevin first, and then Nikkolas and Jim might come back.
I didn't really think that this would be kind of to be on a tangent as well. But speaking from a street perspective or from a street art perspective, yes. I mean, I live in a city where, you know, there's abundance of statues of one particular man, and on an underpass there's a portrait of him that someone painted, or, you know, there's just in the most random of places, you'll drive and all of a sudden there's Frederick's face. So it does lend to that. But I wanted to touch on a couple of things. You were talking, Jim, before about, you know, people putting their money together to pay for his freedom. And that was something a long time ago, like I decided personally for myself. We all have our things that we're looking for to seek out. And this is an ode to you, Jim. This is my own personal art, a tattoo, 7-Eleven, the dollars that they paid for his freedom.
Wow.
So that's my own personal art. But back to the kids here. We talk about things dying down, but systemic racism is not dying down. Systemic racism is alive and real and well, and it's calculated. And for example, here in the city of Rochester, where Frederick spent the greatest part of his adult life by choice, this school in the top 100 cities, metropolitan cities in the United States, Rochester is listed as number 1 for poverty and inequities in children. So the art is a cry out. The art, to answer, you know, Julia's question, is what is the legacy the work would have for the future? It's continual pressure to challenge those policies and procedures that have enabled systemic change as to why we all feel the need to continue to create art in whatever that form is. So that's the process of the unfortunate legacy. So what are we going to do about that? Are we going to do something in our artwork? Are we going to continue to paint things on bridges? That's all good and well. But what are we doing behind those messages is what I would fall back on. And ask that question on, you know, this artivism is spectacular. And there's a lot to be said with that. Just like, you know, Frederick choosing to not look directly in the camera, but then to choosing to look directly in the camera to make sure that he was looking down his oppressors. And I think that that is exactly what this artivism is and should and continue to convey, because systemic racism is like the elephant in the room, and the only way that you can get at it is one bite at a time.
Well said.
Well said. Well said. Kevin, do you have any thoughts on, and it might relate to this, another comment from Stephen, who says that there was an art movement here in Ireland a few years ago, drawing attention to that there were Irish people of color, you know, and I suppose how do we think about the longevity of these projects? You know, again, relating to legacy, but you know that the power of the image is such that, you know, the next image comes along, and there are those that linger. Of course, of Douglas, Jim, your Che Guevara is a great example. But Kevin, do you have any thoughts on how we might go from the ephemeral, something that might disappear? You know, activism can be quite immediate, but where's the long-term aspect to that?
I guess I always see street art and the stuff that I create anyway, it's very much of the moment. You're painting in cities are constantly changing, so the legacy of the actual physical thing you paint, it's probably going to disappear within 5 years. But I suppose we were talking earlier about the visual representation of oppressed people, I guess. I suppose what we should be aiming for essentially is giving these people a voice. So, like, I'm a white guy, I painted Frederick Douglass, but it would be great if somebody from the community in Cork could actually go out onto the street in Cork and create something like it. There have been a few instances of it in Cork, actually. The Glucksman Gallery here in Cork, Michael, which you'll know, they were involved in a few projects with Stevie G and Kate O'Shea, the artist, as well, where they brought kids from direct provision centres into the gallery to do a series of workshops, and they would have created street art pieces as well. But I guess the value of the legacy of these things is the stuff that happens around it. So the conversations, I suppose the ideas that people will get, that, like in Cork, that Black people are welcome here, that they're represented throughout the community, and that we're aware of their presence, and we appreciate and we embrace their presence. But yeah, I guess that's the real legacy. It's just, can these people be given their own voice to do this stuff as well? And like Jim says, we've got a lot of Black talent in the country coming through sports, musicians, but also in the medicines and the sciences, IT. We just need to embrace the people and make them feel welcome and give them a safe space, like Frederick Douglass would have got a couple of centuries ago.
Great.
It's really interesting to think about safe spaces, and I think I mentioned to you all before when we chatted, you know, while Ireland is increasingly diverse, many of our public spaces are still very white in terms of who is represented. Kevin, I know that you mentioned before that on one end of St. Patrick Street here in Cork, the main street, we have a statue to the apostle of temperance himself, Father Theobald Matthew, from the a man from the 1840s. And then at the other end of the street is your street art project of Frederick Douglass, and that wonderful, those wonderful words of his, which now escape me. Kevin, do you have them to hand?
I breathe, and lo, the chattel becomes a man.
That's a really important phrase. I think, you know, in the context of Ireland, Erica and Nikkolas, you might not know so much, but we do have a system of direct provision here, which is a state implemented system, which I suppose includes and I'm lost for words here, but it's, you know, centres that are cater for refugee and migrants, but it is a hugely problematic system, and you know, it's interesting to think of that chattel in the words of Douglass kind of resonating with today. So I think we don't have much more time left, but we do have a question from Todd. Do we have a photo of Kevin's Frederick Douglass street art at all? Possibly.
I actually don't have one at hand, but I can put it up online afterwards if there's none available.
We'll put a link to it so in the chat, if possible. So I suppose, is there anything else from you guys that you'd like to, I suppose, very, very quickly mention about, I suppose, representation? And I know we're kind of quite focused on the portrait here, or kind of presenting likeness. Are there other ways that we might think about the future of this, rather than the past of it, but the future of it? Is it just a project of continuing to be visible and to make diversity visible, whatever that might be?
Well, we have a good example of it with the clenched fist that was used throughout the that month where we blacked out our computer screens, if you remember, as a visual, the simple visual of a clenched fist that said everything. The old black power symbol.
Yeah. Yeah. And just for everyone watching, and the image that just popped up is Kevin O'Brien's street art project relating to Frederick Douglass. So a very familiar image to many. Sorry, now I'll get back to you all. Are there any parting shots from you that you, itching things that you want to ask each other? Or is that am I putting you on the spot?
I was curious to know, I mean, I saw that wonderful piece by Nikkolas of George Floyd. And George Floyd has almost become an icon as much as Shay or anybody else for the times we live in. And I wonder, George Floyd, if it was put in an Irish context, would not be as resonant as in a Black area in America, in Chicago, in Flint, Michigan, wherever you like. How do you feel that this image has woken the Black movement, you might say, in a way that I haven't seen for many, many decades? One man's horrific death, which we all saw, and then the paintings and the interpretations of him by yourself and people who've done the street murals, they're extraordinarily powerful.
Thank you. I know, I feel like, for one, that video, just in a time where we can unfortunately see the horrific deaths of people like so widely shared, it just sparked something in people, and it, you know, it literally propelled people into the streets last summer. And, you know, to have this piece that I actually created it. It's really part of my Sunday sketch series, but also Black Lives Matter Global used it, and they ended up putting it like in Times Square and like every big digital billboard all over. And then it was like on, literally I opened CNN.com and it was like on protest signs in New Zealand and all over. And it just felt like it was something that people could use as a rallying cry. Even a lot of people say like they don't have the words to say how they feel or how they can express to their community their support, but a lot of times they can share an image or, you know, hold up a sign with a photo or something. And so I think it was beautiful that it was used for that. And the reason why I put him in a tux is, again, I wanted to, you know, make him a little more stately and show his, you know, the humanity that he is worth more than, you know, all of the silver and gold. You know, one human life is worth more than all the silver and gold in the world, and his life was worth more than that. And so then what happened to him at the end. So
well done.
Thank you.
Really great. Guys, I think we're almost out of time, and I suppose just wanted to draw together some of the strands here, and I suppose then again resonate with the words of our own president here in Ireland around that kind of ethical remembrance. You know, Nikkolas, you just mentioned something that obviously an image that resonated so much that people who could not articulate or couldn't find those words could, you know, do a simple act of sharing something, and in sharing something, you know, you create a sort of a digital community, I suppose. in this world we live in, everything is quite virtual now. But do you think then that well, I suppose I won't ask any more questions because we've run out of time. But I suppose it's a really important thing to think about, that sense of community, forging communities through image-based work, whether it's on the street, whether it's online, and seeing, recognizing, and hearing people. And I think there's a lot of power in there. And I think we've only scratched the surface today. But I'd like to thank Erica, Kevin, Jim and Nikkolas for sharing their thoughts, your thoughts with our audience today, and giving of your Sunday, whatever time of day it might be. And I'm now going to hand back over to the Douglass Week team here, who will wrap things up.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Great to meet you.
I think we should all have applause. There should be applause.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks all. I'm not sure if we had one more image that that we were hoping to share. I'm not sure if we can get that up on the screen as yet. So we'll try as I'm talking to close out now. Just to say, over the course of this week, Douglass Week, the theme that keeps on coming up with me is connection, and certainly all of the connections that that people make to Frederick Douglass, the story of Frederick Douglass in Ireland, the story of Frederick Douglass, period, and how he was present, very much present in many different ways throughout his life, and remains very much present in many people's lives now, and an inspiration. And certainly, I think we have an image. This is an image that Erica wanted to share. Erica, I don't know if you can unmute yourself if you want to say one more word and just
sure.
talk about this image. Thanks.
Sure, just really quickly. So this again was from the local school that I work with, School 17, and they really wanted to incorporate the movement behind all of the work that Anna Marie done led to the continual movement of systemic racism now.
That's great. So thanks so much. I'm glad we were able to get that up there. It actually underscores exactly what I was saying, not planned at all. And I said Frederick Douglass inspires people. Anna Marie Douglass certainly inspired and empowered Frederick Douglass, and does the same for us today as well. And speaking of inspiring and empowering women, I can't believe I'm saying this, but the last event of Douglass Week is coming up very shortly. It's at 8 p.m. GMT, and it features a number of women who I think all of us on the team here are inspired by every day, including former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, and Nettie Washington Douglass, who of course is a Douglass descendant, a descendant of Booker T. Washington as well, and president, co-chair, or chair, I should say, of the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives. So more information about that event is on our website, www.douglasincork.com. Please sign up, please tell your friends, please join us, and thank you very much for joining us here today. And thanks to Michael for leading us through the conversation, and to all of the panelists for your excellent work and for joining us here today, for your time. Thanks, everybody.